Welcome, dear Brendan Bays, to Welcome Soul Business, the online congress for founders to lift up.
I am so thrilled that we're doing this together and that we're bringing so many beautiful speakers and leaders together to share and empowering people during this time.
Yeah, and today we will talk about how you can experience real miracles if you go the way of your heart and which fears can expect you or wait for you on this heavy way of, yeah.
You
Brandon,
know,
for how long are you self-employed now? And yeah, when did you start your own heart business?
probably 26 and a half years ago.
Wow.
So definitely self-employed.
I'm very excited to listen to your own life story. How did you come to get into your self-employment?
Well, many years ago, about 30 years ago, I was with Tony Robbins and I was a presenter for him, giving the Living Health seminar and also a master trainer with him. And I got diagnosed with a basketball-sized tumor, which really sent me reeling. And it plunged me into my own journey, my own healing journey. In only 6.5 weeks' time, I healed from this massive tumor. And it kind of catapulted me onto a massive spiritual journey. And then the year after I had the tumor and healed from it, I then my house, I had a little beach shack in Malibu, California, right perched right on the sand. Even though I'm from New York City, I'd moved from New York to Malibu, and there were the big mega fires, the wildfires that they were having at the time. And ours was a sole and only little cottage that went down on the beach, and our cars exploded, and we were financially totally wiped out. The next year, and in the same exact month, we'd started to cobble our lives back together again. And my husband came and told me that he had fallen in love with a younger woman and had spoken to her about marriage. And I mean, you could have knocked me over with a feather. I had no clue. And I can remember so clearly Sabina walking out into our living room, and it felt as if life had taken the very foundations of my life and was shaking it, and that my whole life was crumbling and falling apart. And I actually saw this mountain appear in front of me, this mountain called Brandon, and me and my life, this beautiful marriage, this beautiful, job that I had, this beautiful lifestyle that I'd created. And it was as if life itself was shaking the foundations of that mountain. And it started to crumble, and it turned into so much gravel and turned into dust. And I started to free fall in abject terror. And every time I tried to reach with my mind to grab for something that I understood was my life, it's like I'm not a wife anymore. I don't have a livelihood anymore. I don't have the ability to put a roof over my house, myself anymore. And it just seemed like everywhere I turned, I lost my job. And it just seemed that everywhere I turned, everything that had seemed so solid and so real had turned to dust. And I began to let go and free fall in this terror. And then I became aware of what I was free falling in, and that there was this embrace of love holding me, carrying me. And I realized that this love had been carrying me through all this series of disasters. And it was the only thing that I could trust in, was this field of love that was pervading and is pervading all of existence. And I remember marching up the stairs into my kitchen, and I passed by this, the refrigerator, and on the refrigerator was a magnet. And on that magnet was a quotation that a friend of mine had given me. And, I'd never paid it much attention, but the words were, "No whatever comes unexpected, to be a gift from God. And it will surely serve you if you use it to its fullest. It's only this that you strive for out of your own imagination that gives you trouble. Know whatever comes unexpected to be a gift from God. And when I read those words, of course, I didn't have a clue what could possibly be the gift in this. But I had a certain knowing that if somehow I trusted in this presence, that somehow I would be guided. And it was a year after this moment, and I was trying to cobble my life together, and my husband and I had met with not a lawyer, but an arbitrator to create a divorce agreement. And the divorce agreement had come through, and even though we'd been at that point together for 21 years, we'd agreed that because so much of my life was about serving him in his career, serving Tony in his career, that I needed a couple of years to get myself on my own 2 feet. And so instead of dividing everything in half, I agreed to a modest spousal support payment that was happening every month so I could, build my private practice as a therapist and be able to be on my own 2 feet. Now, at this point, I'm 41 years old and I have all these degrees, and all the, having been on stage with thousands of people. And I was in my living room and I was in front of the couch and I was vacuuming the carpet there with a Hoover. And as I was hoovering, out of nowhere came all this fear. And when I say fear, it was almost like a panic attack. No story about it, just pure out and out fear. And I didn't know this, but I had fear of feeling fear. And so I did what many of us do when fear comes up, we go on the run, and I started, calling friends and going to movies and getting on the web and learning all I could and surfing on the web and doing a lot more clients. And I was just keeping myself busy and in motion. And I was on the run from fear. And then about 4 days later, vroom, up came another wave of this panic, this fear. And I even got more busy and I threw myself into more motion. Finally, it was a week after that I was hoovering the same spot that had been hoovering the week before. And out of nowhere came this massive, overwhelming fear. And I looked down at the spot on the carpet that I'd been hoovering, and I realized I hadn't even sat on that couch since yesterday, and I'd hoovered that spot. And I recognized I was on the run. And I thought, Brandon, you're just going to have to face whatever this fear is about. You're going to have to turn and face the fear and look the tiger and offer yourself into the tiger's mouth of fear. And so I just sat down on my couch and I pulled out a piece of paper and I wrote at the top of the piece, this is really stupid, but I wrote at the top of the paper, okay, what's the worst that could happen here? What am I so afraid of? And I closed my eyes and I asked myself that question. And a picture of the spousal support check that I was supposed to receive in the next couple of days came up, and that I wasn't going to receive it. And I thought, really? This is what you're so afraid of? You have a life-threatening tumor. You have your house burned down. Your husband leaves you for another woman. And what you're really afraid of is this small check isn't going to come in. And I thought it must be something deeper than this. It's got to be something deeper than a check not coming in. You never had this kind of rampant, out and out, waves of fear coming like this. And so very innocently, at the top of that same page, I wrote myself the question as if I was questioning myself. I said, okay, what's the worst that could happen? Let's say this check doesn't come in. What's the worst that could happen, Brandon? And I closed my eyes and I thought, well, the worst that could happen is that the check doesn't come in. And after a month or two, I'm not going to have enough money to pay my rent. And as I made a picture of not being able to pay the rent, all this fear came up and all this panic. And I said, okay, if that's what happens, you can't pay the rent, what's the worst that could happen? I really want to scrape the bottom of this fear, right? Well, the worst that could happen is that my landlord, who I know cares about me, would have to throw me out. And at the age of 41 years old, and with all my diplomas and education and experience and life experience, I would get thrown out. And when I made a picture of being thrown out onto the street, all the shame came flooding and feeling like myself to be like this abject failure. And I thought, well, if that happened, what would I do? And of course, I made a picture of going to stay with my mother, and I immediately crossed that out and said, I am not going to become a parasite to my mother at the age of nearly 42 years old. And so I made a picture of going to stay with my best girlfriend there in Santa Monica. And as soon as I made a picture of it, I heard the saying that we have in the United States that after a couple of weeks, you wear out your welcome. And even with the best of will, my girlfriend would want to start shooing me out of the house. And when that happened, all this waves of absolute devastation and betrayal, and that my best friend would throw me out of the house, not being mean in doing it, but just because, well, it's time to move on, and just the shame and devastation. And I said, okay, well, if that happened, what's the worst that could happen? And I found myself in a picture of myself on the streets of New York. And I was this homeless person with a cup, begging for people to put quarters in my cup so I could feed myself. And it seemed like no matter how much education or degrees or how much life experience, I thought, what is my worst fear? And my worst fear was, I haven't got intrinsically what it takes to survive. And I said, well, if that were true, what's the worst that could happen? And when I asked, well, if I haven't got what it takes to survive, I thought, well, death of the physical form would happen. And I closed my eyes and I began to feel as if my body was sort of dissolving. And I fell into this field of black nothingness. And as I let go into that, pinpricks of light started flooding in, suffusing it. And it had a sense of peace, of love. And I thought, well, even if the worst happens and the body falls away and I die, still this essential I, this that is me, remains. And I asked, well, who am I then? Who am I? And as I asked that, I fell and dissolved even deeper into this vast field of love. And I opened my eyes and I circled this worst fear. And I thought, you know what? If I do a journey process, which can really clear out this fear and really finish with this fear, what's the best that could happen? And so I turned the page over, excuse me, Sometimes when tears come, they come out here instead of here.
Me too.
And
I'm so overwhelmed from your story. I cannot talk. I cannot. I'm just like hypnotized.
and so I turned the page over and I wrote the words, okay, let's say I do clear out this worst fear. What's the best that could happen? And I wrote the words, the best that could happen is that I realize that this check is never coming in and that I get real. And I go to the meditation center tomorrow and see if I can find someone, a roommate, a housemate who could share my apartment with me. And so we could split the rent and buy myself some time to get my life started again. And I said, okay, let's say that happens. You do find a roommate and it splits your bills in half. Well, what's the best that could happen? Well, Brandon, the best that could happen is you could realize you had this amazing work that you've not been sharing with your friends in the seminar business, that you haven't had the courage to let them know about, and that you call up your best friends and you share, listen, I've got this amazing work which is born from my own experience of healing from a basketball-sized tumor. And I'm willing to do a seminar in your home and we can split whatever proceeds come so people can learn about healing and awakening and cellular healing. And I thought, okay. And I wrote all this down. I made a picture of what that was like. And I said, okay, if that happens, then what's the best that could happen? Well, the best that could happen is that I do reach out to all my friends and I start giving these seminars in people's homes. And the amazing thing out of that is that people would be like me and they'd realize they can participate in their own healing journeys and that more and more people would get this extraordinary work. And I thought, wow, if that happened, then what's the best that could happen? I got to continue writing. Well, then eventually big seminars would start happening and magazine articles and newspaper articles and television shows would start happening. And if that happened, then what's the best that could happen? Well, then I would end up writing books and I'd reach into other countries where people can't even afford to go to a seminar. And they would get access to this life-changing work. If that happened, then what would happen? Well, eventually in time, it would catch fire like wildfire around the globe. And there'd be this huge wave of awakening and healing sweeping our globe. And I thought, wow, if that's the best that could happen by facing down and clearing my worst fear, I'm going to do that. That day, I did a journey process and I cleared out my worst fear. The next day I went to the meditation center and I found a roommate, which allowed me to split the bills. Within the next week, I had called everyone I knew in the seminar business and spoken to them about this work that I believe is my calling. And by then, over the next months, I was giving a journey seminar once a month. And by the end of that year, they were getting huge. And then I started after the first year, there was a massive article in the Sunday Times in Britain where I had 2,500 calls that first week in Britain. And I had to give journey intensives every week for 3 months. And they were all of them overbooked. We couldn't manage all the people calling. And then of course a book got written and then that became a massive international bestseller and millions have bought and read and done the work from the book. And then now here we are, you and I are sitting here and the journey seminars are offered in 39 countries in 24 different languages. And it's a work that I'm right now on the board of directors, let's say, in 2 different hospitals in Israel. And they have the oncology floor for surgeons who are doing cancer operations with patients. And they also have a heart floor in the other hospital for those who are undergoing heart operations. And then a week after people have had their operations, they have a recovery week in hospital where they're getting ongoing journey work. And so I never dreamt that here, all these years later, I'm now working with medical doctors to support patients and getting to the emotional corollary, what is co-creating their illnesses. And even the CDC has it on their website that 85% of all illness has an emotional basis. And so this work is about getting to the emotional basis of our illness and to the cell memory stored inside our body, and it is using by medicine, by psychologists and people all around the world from all walks of life. And so yes, facing down our worst fears is what I wouldn't be sitting here right now had I not done that process, that simple process of someone who was so afraid of feeling fear that I said, that's it. I'm going to get to the bottom of this fear and finish with it. And so, yes, if people are facing that and they're self-employed, you know, I know what it is to have a business and offices in many different countries, employees and insurances and lawyers and accountants and bookkeepers and finance directors and all of that. But it all sprang from, I promise you, from that one day where I got to the root of my deepest fear, which for me was I intrinsically did not have what it takes to survive. And in finishing with that, I found all the courage that one needed to start taking action. Because you can't just envision what you want for your career. You have to follow through with action. And I was just compelled into action, 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 and just following the guidance of the heart. And I never questioned it. I always had this belief that if I listened to the heart, that and followed it, if I got a yes, an internal green light inside, I plunged ahead and I didn't look back. But if I ever got not so sure about this, sort of a glitch, that's when I'd listen up. Because if every time I've gone against truth, I've gone against this listening to what the heart's guidance is, I've ended up at the bottom of the mountain. And I can always look up to the top of the mountain and see the very moment that I belied truth, that I went against, tried to do something logical instead of listening to a deeper, wordless knowing.
Wow. This is the story of a phoenix.
It is. I've often felt myself to be a phoenix that's rising from the ashes, and it's a time where many of us are feeling like that's the invitation that is being made to all of us, that it's kind of what we thought was our life may have gone up in flames. And then there's this point where we need to open and surrender and just let a deeper guidance propel us in the direction the heart wants to go. So that's my story of how I got here.
Amazing. It's amazing. I'm still speechless. Now, when I do a summary of your story for the founders, then you can say that the most important things for founding and is facing the fears, feeling the fears, being brave, and have a big vision, and then lift off, isn't it?
Yes, it's not only feeling the fears and opening into them, but ultimately, in my case, it was clearing it and finishing from the cell memories and what had put that initial fear in place. When I finished with it, then it wasn't even a case of being brave. It was a case of just listening to an inner guidedness and feeling that I was living my life's calling, my life's purpose in life, to serve life and bringing these tools of awakening and healing to life.
What I find is really interesting is that many people are very successful in her business when they are doing something out of their own experiences they had.
Yes, it's so true, because then it's coming from your direct living experience, not from some formula outside not someone else's notions of what you should do, but it's almost like a primal purpose that's living through you. And that purpose has in it passion. There's a passion, in my case, to serve life, to bring this work of awakening and healing that is transforming millions of people's lives to our world. And every day I just have one mantra, and it's just use me, just use me, and let grace use me. However I get used, I really am just absolutely surrendered, whatever form that takes, however I do get used. And so, yes, it's a constant inner listening. You know, one of the things I found for myself as a business person, and this is what did take courage, is all of us know so much, perhaps too much, of how to do a good business, how to run seminars, how to. And that knowing gets in the way of a listening to a deeper voice that is wordless. It's born and is prior to thinking mind. And it takes a courage to surrender each day and listen to the wordless guidance of the heart, rather than to the constant logic that the thinking mind, the superego, tries to entice you with and make you believe, which may take you down a path which doesn't serve you or anyone. And so it does take courage not to take action, but to listen deeply to the wordless knowing. And that's a moment by moment listening. And I found that my body is the barometer of my own soul. And what I mean by this is that anytime I have a question, should I do this or should I do this? So two different questions. I'll close my eyes and I'll tune into the front of my chest and the middle of my body here. And I'll ask, should I do choice number one? And I'll make a picture of it. And then I'll check in with my heart. How does that make me feel? And if I get, just an easy breezy feeling, it won't be coming in words, but just a ease, I just plunge ahead and take action, action, action. If, however, I say should I do, choice number two or the second choice, and I get like this gripping, this clench, this like I don't do it. Because every time I've ignored this
Intuition.
body wisdom, and I do believe the body is the barometer of your soul. The only way your soul can speak to you is not through words. They come from the mind. But to listening to the body, it will indicate to you whether it feels right or wrong to do something. And if I get that gut clenching, it's like, don't go there. I don't know why. It doesn't mean never go there. It just means not now. Now's not the time. I may reapproach that particular choice at another time, but it's a constant listening to this. And that takes courage, because the voices from outside yourself would tell you something different. It's so easy to listen to the various voices outside ourselves trying to tell us how we should be doing things. But when you're a phoenix rising from the ashes, all that you have to go on, the only wings, the only wind that you have beneath your wings to allow liftoff, is this listening to the heart and unfailingly following its guidance. So it'll even come down to, someone will ask me a question in our business where recently this happened. One of our staff said, "I'd like to talk to so and so about working with them." And what's your hit on that, Brandon? Of course, I know the person that they're speaking about working with, and I close my eyes, I check in my body, and I check whether this feels like an appropriate action with this particular person filling this particular spot. Do you understand? And so it's an inner listening. Now, of course, my body, my ears, my mind, everything has heard all the feedback from the universe. It's not that I don't take feedback from the universe, but ultimately, when the final decision gets made, it comes from that wordless guidance of the heart.
All right, I got it. Brandon, if you look back to your own to your own life, which was the biggest miracle which did happen
Oh my God.
from
Feels
all
like every day is a
those
miracle.
miracles?
The biggest miracle. It starts, of course, with my healing from a basketball-sized tumor and this work birthing itself. And I am absolutely certain that I did not give birth to the journey, that it was a download from grace. And that particular miracle of a download from grace has ended up being the greatest gift of my life. And the work is not a static work, it's a living work that is, 26 years on, birthing itself anew and going in all different kinds of directions, working with ministries of government and journey outreach and humanitarian projects and working with all aspects of life. And so from life, discovering what works and doesn't work, but that initial miracle of listening to my own experience of healing from that tumor has been really the origin, the source of all the countless miracles that have gone on in my life since then. And everything is a miracle. I never dreamt that the journey book, when I wrote it, would end up in so many different countries and in so many different languages and would reach so many people from all walks of life and different incomes and different status. I never dreamt that I'd be working in slums in Africa and orphanages in India, and it's like the work itself is a miracle that's constantly expanding and growing and getting very refined and user-friendly for the different areas of life.
Thank you very much, dear Brandon, for sharing your story with us and going forward for us. I'm really looking forward for seeing you again at the Empowerment Mindset Day, where we will have how can I say, exercises with you to go through our fears.
Yes, that will be wonderful. I look forward to it too.
Thank you. See you.
Namaste.
Namaste.